Hello everyone! In this lesson, we are going to write PHP to create custom API endpoints so that users can create alike or delete alike. If you're wondering why we're going to create new custom endpoints instead of using the default REST API endpoints, don't worry, we will cover the why a bit later on in the video. Okay, so I'm on a Professor Detail screen, and in our previous lesson, we set things up so that if you click on the like box, that's going to fire off one of two methods. So here we are in our like.js module, and when you click the like box, it's either going to fire off create like or delete like. And instead of these test alert messages, what we really want to do is send off a request to a custom API URL. So right now, on the PHP side of things, let's go create or register new custom API URLs. So to do that, let's jump into functions.php, and we could just start coding this new feature anywhere in this file, but in order to stay super organized, why don't we write our new PHP in a separate file? You might remember that we've already done this for our custom search route. For example, in the root of our theme folder, we have a subfolder named inc, which stands for include. And it contains a file named search-route. And remember, that's where we wrote all of the PHP code that powers the custom search REST API URL. So why don't we do this? Just to stay organized, within this inc folder, why don't we create a brand new file? The name of this file does not matter, but why don't we call it like-route.php. Within this file, let's open up a PHP tag. You actually do not need a closing PHP tag if your file is just pure PHP and doesn't contain any HTML. Okay, let's go ahead and save that again, and then back in our functions.php file, let's import or require in that brand new file that we just created. Now up at the top of my functions file, I've got this existing require line. You could just copy and paste and adjust that, but if that's not up at the top for you, I'll just type it out again to give you a reference. So we say require, and then we just point towards a file. Now WordPress makes this easy because it has a function named getThemeFilePath. Let's end this line with a semicolon, and then within these parentheses, we just provide a path that's relative to our theme folder. So let's say go inside that inc subfolder, and we just named that brand new file like-route.php. Okay, let's go ahead and save that, and then let's jump into our brand new like route file. Let's begin by adding an action. So add action, and the name of the WordPress event that we want to hook onto is REST API init. You might remember that we've used this before whenever we want to add a new custom route or add a new field to a route. Okay, then for the second argument, let's make up a function name. We could call it whatever we want, but let's say university like route. Next, let's create a function with this exact matching name. So function university like routes, parentheses, curly brackets. Okay, and within this function, what we want to do is register two new routes. A route is basically just a REST API URL. Now, if you wanted to save some typing, you could just jump into the search route file that lives in our inc folder. So if I do that, here we can see the register REST route method. So you could just copy and paste this and adjust it to meet your needs, but I think practice makes perfect, so why don't we type it out by hand and analyze how it works. So within this brand new function that we just set up, let's say register REST route. Okay, and within the parentheses, we want to give it 3 arguments. So you could say A, B, C as placeholders. The first argument is the beginning part of the URL, known as the namespace. So why don't we say university/v1, This doesn't matter. It could be whatever you please. Then the second argument is the name for this specific route or URL. So why don't we say manage like? Again, the name does not matter. We can make up whatever we want. And the final and third argument is an array. Within the array parentheses, I like to drop down. And in the array, we want to provide two things. So first is methods. I will set that to a temporary X placeholder. And the other property is callback. All right, now before we fill in these placeholder X values, and before we even review the terms callback and methods, what I first want to do is duplicate this entire register REST route block of code. So I'm just going to copy this right below it, paste it in. And the reason I want two of these is because I want the first one to be for the post method, and I want the second one to be for the delete method. So the word methods in this context just means the type of HTTP request that this route is responsible for. So that's why we are setting up two different routes. Even though they are targeting the same URL that you would type in, right? University v1 manage like, they are unique because this one will respond to a post request and this one will respond to a delete request. All right, and then callback is just a function that we want to run when a request is sent to one of these routes. Now we could type out an inline anonymous function here, but instead, to stay organized, why don't we do this? Down at the very bottom of this file, let's create two brand new functions. You could name these functions whatever you please, but I'm going to name them create like, parentheses, curly brackets, and I will name the other function, you might have guessed it, delete like. Okay, so now if someone sends a post request, I want to respond with, or I want my callback to be, the create like function. And if someone sends a delete request, I want to respond by calling the delete like function. Okay, and then within these functions, we are free to do absolutely whatever we want. So this is where we will programmatically create a new like post, and this is where we will programmatically delete a like post. And we can implement our own custom logic and restrictions, right? Things like each user can only like each professor once. Now, before we get into that, why don't we just return a sample message here? Because whatever these functions return is the data that will be available to our JavaScript. Let me show you what I mean. So within this create like function, let's just return a string of text that says, thanks for trying to create a like, and end the line with a semicolon. And within the delete like function, let's return a string of text, thanks for trying to delete a like, semicolon at the end. Okay, let's go ahead and save this. And now let's write a bit of JavaScript so that when you click the like box, JavaScript will send out a request to either this route or this route. Okay, so let's jump back into our like.js module and let's start with our create like method. So let's delete this alert test message pop-up and instead let's use jQuery's Ajax tool. So $.ajax, okay, and that's a method. Now within the parentheses, we want to provide it an object, a JavaScript object with different properties. So I like to drop down within the curly brackets, and let's give this object a few different properties. The first is URL. We can fill this in just a moment. Let's add a placeholder. We also want a property named type. This is the type of HTTP request that we want to send. I will say quotes, all capital, post. That's the traditional type when you want to create something. Okay, then let's add another property named success. This is a function that will run if our request is successful. Let's just add a placeholder. And then there's also a property named error, which is also a function that will run if the request fails. Okay, now let's go through and fill out the X placeholders. So for the URL, we want that to be universitydata.root URL. That's the property that we set up a long time ago that gives us the flexible root part of the domain. And then we want to add on /wp-json. And if we were using the default REST API endpoints for a post type, then we would type /wp/v2 and then whatever post type we wanted to work with, right? So either posts or pages or note. However, in this case, since we set up custom endpoints, let's say wp-json/university/v1, right? Because that's the namespace that we used when we just registered the new routes. And then we named our routes manage like. Okay, so just make sure that this part that I'm highlighting matches the name that you used back in our new PHP file, right? You want it to match this. Okay, so back in our JavaScript, let's provide success and error functions. So if our request is successful, let's just provide an ES6 arrow function. And within the curly brackets or body of the function, let's just say console.log response, whatever the WordPress server responds with. In order to do that, though, we want to be sure to pass response as a parameter within these parentheses. Okay, and for now, let's just do the exact same thing if the request fails. So for the error function, parentheses, arrow symbol, curly brackets, console.log response. And be sure to pass that as a parameter. Okay, so we've got this test code in place for the create-like method. Now let's do the same thing for our delete-like method. Let's save a ton of typing by just duplicating this AJAX call. So copy from here to here, copy that into my clipboard. Then within the delete-like method, just get rid of the alert and paste in your clipboard. For now, the only thing we need to change is the type of request that we're sending. Instead of a post request, let's send a delete request. Everything else can stay exactly the same. We can target the exact same URL. Okay, let's go ahead and save this and make sure that your JavaScript gets rebundled, and then let's hop over to the front end. And I have not liked this professor yet, so if I click on the like box and then check my console, cool, we see thanks for trying to create a like. This means that our custom API endpoints are doing their job. We successfully registered those new URLs and they are returning the desired data. Just as a test, if I go back to Dr. Barks-a-Lot, I've already liked this professor, so if I click on the like box and then check my console, thanks for trying to delete a like. Cool, so at this point, our front-end JavaScript is successfully communicating with our back-end PHP. Now that's going to bring this video to a close, but in the next part of this lesson, we are going to write the PHP to actually programmatically create or delete a like post. So if I jump back into that new like route PHP file, within these two PHP functions, we are going to write the necessary code to not only create or delete a like post, but also enforce all of our custom logic and restrictions. And this is where things really start to get fun. We're starting to put all of the pieces together. The front end, the back end, HTTP requests, and making queries to the WordPress database. And once you're comfortable with smushing all of those things together, you can build pretty much whatever you can think up. So let's keep things rolling, and I will see you in the next part of this lesson.